All right, our scripture this morning is 1 Kings 19, 8 through 13, and Psalm 46:10. And it's helpful to have the context for this 1 Kings passage. Just remember that Queen Jezebel has threatened Elijah to kill him because he was victorious over her prophets of Baal. And so Elijah begins to fear for his life because she means it. She will kill him. So he flees and he goes out into the wilderness for refuge, and he ends up at the spot where the cave where our scripture takes place. Elijah got up and ate and drank. Then he went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, which is also Sinai, the Mount of God. At that place he came to a cave and spent the night there. Then the word of the Lord came to him, saying, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He answered, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they are seeking my life to take it away." He said, "Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Now there was a great wind, so strong that it was splitting mountains and breaking rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of sheer silence. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. Then there came a voice to him that said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And then from Psalm 46:10, "Be still and know that I am God." So let's focus in on the end of verse 12 and into 13 right now. A sound of sheer silence. Oftentimes that's translated as a still small voice or a quiet whisper. But this really gets at the matter better. A sound of sheer silence. Not sheer as in absolute or pure or complete. A sound of absolute silence. No, not that. But sheer as in translucent, diaphanous or gauzy, thin.
Like curtains.
Curtains. Thin. Yeah. And so what we would say is, oddly, a sound of thin silence. A sound of thin silence. And that's almost a nonsensical phrase, because what you're talking about is a sound of silence, my old friend. But I think of this phrase, and it reminds me of the Celtic notion of thin places. And thin places are those where they say that the veil between what is physical and what is spiritual is thin or permeable, or again, you can see through. These are places, thin places, where we recognize that the world is sacramental. Thin places are where we recognize that we live in a God-enchanted world. A thin silence is simply one in which, a silence in which we hear beyond what is physically audible. It isn't merely the absence of sound. It isn't merely the absence of sound. It is the context in which we may perceive the presence of God. So it's not about emptiness, it's about presence. The context in which we may know presence. And this is why we read in verse 13, so he is aware of the thin silence and he goes out, and the words, then there came a voice to him. What's helpful is that the word for voice in verse 13 and the word for sound in verse 12 are the same word. And so, what does this tell you about the voice, if anything?
He's present.
That he is present.
Comes from a living God.
Comes from a living God. What does it say to you about the voice itself? Is it one that's audible?
It's not really audible, but it's revealed.
Yes, it's not audible, but it is revealed. It is perceived, because the thin silence is a perception, not just the emptiness of sound. And so the voice of God is not simply the presence of sound. It is a perceived presence of God. A thin silence is the context in which we may perceive God. It's that context in which we discern that God is speaking to us. All right, any comments or questions before we move ahead?
It's like the smoke screens removed, kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really. You were talking about this before, how there's the melody of God and other things harmonized and other or not harmonized.
Yes.
But the melody is still
Yes.
there.
Right. Yeah. A thin silence is one in where you hear the melody.
Yeah.
Yes. Right. Any others? Okay, let's move into 46:10. We know this so well, but these two ideas are connected very strongly. Be still. So the words be still can also be translated as be quiet. And you'll find this, for example, in 1 Samuel 15:6. Be quiet. The words assume a certain human condition. And that condition is that humanity we've put our hands on life so that we can manage it. We put our hands on life. We handle things, people, circumstances, our own histories, our own identities. We're constantly handling things to control or manipulate, to plan or to acquire. So to be still is to take your hands off of life so that you're not trying to handle things anymore. It is the quieting of the manipulation. It is the quieting of the thoughts and the passions that cause you to seek out your own agenda and impose it upon the world, even if you think your own agenda is the right one. It is the quieting of the striving, the quieting of the anxiety. Notice what happens when that is done. That's when you know God. Fascinating. That's when you know God. Yeah, I don't know whose beep that is, but all right.
Oh.
If it's my car, just kick it. So, this word for know, yada, Y-A-D-A, is a word that we've dealt with before. And this isn't intellectual knowledge, this is relational knowledge. This is about intimacy. This is about experiential knowledge. And so it takes being still, quieting down those things we were talking about in order to know God in communion. And so we can put these two ideas that we're talking about together in this way. Being still, quieting your hands-on approach to life leads into thin silence. Say that again. Being still, quieting your hands-on approach to life leads into thin silence, where we may perceive God and grow in communion with Him. Now I'll say it all together, right? Being still is quieting your hands-on approach to life that leads into a thin silence where we may perceive God and grow in relational knowledge or communion with Him. And if you don't have this, just pick it up on the podcast. You'll get it. But you get the idea right now, I hope. Yeah? Okay. Are there any questions or comments on this and how it relates back?
Yeah, this is really good stuff, I'll tell you that.
Good, well, thanks. So let's come to our first question. What would you say a thick silence would be? Think about what a thin silence is. What is a thick silence?
Well, I'm trying to control everything on my own, and I just can't seem to hear God's voice.
Yeah, a thick silence is going to be one in which you cannot perceive God. And one of the dominating reasons that you can't is because you're working an angle.
Is it because you're just doing your own thing into your own self, into your own stuff?
That's part of it. We're going to expand on this for 2 or 3 more weeks, and we'll be able to flesh this out a little bit more in that. But yes, for example, if there's a particular problem that you're dealing with, whether it's at work or at home, and you are analyzing that, trying to work it through, there's nothing evil about that. But as you're taking the load to figure out what to do, and then you're pursuing the action that you've chosen, at that point, oftentimes, if somebody says, so what is God saying to you? Well, I don't care. This is what I'm doing. That's a thick silence, because you're not perceiving God at all. Sometimes a silence is thick because our attention is taken up with our despair or our anxiety. And our attention is so focused on that and what we need to do to alleviate that or to right it in some way that we aren't still. This is when we put our head down and we work just harder, because that's got to be the answer, right? Or we out-argue the other person. We put them in their place. We show them up to be the fool they are. And we spend all this time thinking through in our own heads how we will really decimate them with our words. That's a thick silence.
I was going to say, like, if I get angry about something and I dwell on that.
Mm-hmm. So recall then that a thin silence is not merely the absence of noise. So you can pursue silence as though it's an agenda to be accomplished. All you're trying to do there is just shut things out, but that's not a thin silence. It may include some of that, but that's not a thin silence. And a thin silence can occur in the midst of turmoil. You don't have to have every annoying sound reduced or eliminated. It's the posture of being still, quieting the hands-on approach that leads into the thin silence. It doesn't produce revelation, it simply leads you into the thin silence where if God speaks, you may perceive him. So this is not about controlling a response either. I know what I'll do. Haven't heard from God today. I'll make sure I listen to nothing. I'll just put myself in a dark, quiet room for half an hour, and then God will tell me what to do. And that's just you trying to manipulate God. Because maybe God doesn't want to speak then, so maybe it would just be best to go into silence without an agenda. That would be more of a thin silence. Yeah, but those are so useless. Because I've got to be productive. I've got to be doing something. And if I'm not doing something, if I'm not productive, then the whole thing is just wasted. In the real world, it's wasted. I mean, in your nice little religious world, it's fine. But in the real world, no. Right?
Yeah, there's a difference in the practices and then being in control.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Setting the sail so when the wind blows, it's there to catch it.
That's right, Rob. That's exactly right. So, let's move on to the second question. What does it mean to you that the Lord was not in the wind, not in the earthquake, or not in the fire? And maybe just some background that would be helpful for you as you think about that. If you look into Israel's past, and even especially on Sinai, Horeb, God made himself known in the shaking of the earth. In the fire, pillar of fire, led through. God made himself known in the wind. Play with that if you want. If not, if you have a different answer, feel free. That's good too.
And if you focus on those things, that's thick silence and instead of thin silence.
Yes. Because God showed up in the fire doesn't mean that fire is God.
Right, yeah.
And so every time you see fire, oh, God's talking to me.
Or looking for him in a feeling.
Looking for him in a feeling. Yep.
Yeah, I would say those are all distractions, things that keep you trying to figure out how you're gonna handle that situation.
Yeah. Right.
Worry, anxiety,
Yeah.
Yeah, waiting for an emotion
Mhm.
is actually the distraction.
Well, remember just a little bit before, part of the context for why Elijah is in the cave on this occasion is that he called fire down from heaven, right, onto the wet offerings in the context of dealing with the Baal prophets. They couldn't do that. He did so. Well, God's in the fire, but it says specifically God wasn't in the fire. God wasn't in the wind. Now, God is everywhere. So that's obviously not what he's saying. What he's saying is God wasn't unveiling himself in that. And this is where the thin silence is so important, because how will you know whether God is revealing himself in the fire or the earthquake or the wind unless there is a thin silence in which you can perceive God's there. You cannot simply turn God into a formula. As we've said before, our relationship with God is not cause and effect.
Is it that he wasn't revealing himself, or if he wasn't being perceived?
He was not revealing himself. He wasn't speaking through the fire. Because Elijah needed to hear something different. One of the things that C.S. Lewis used to say was that if you want to stop hearing from God, start yelling encore. In other words, if you saw God in a particular story and you were moved by that, that doesn't mean that every time you go back to that story, you're going to be moved in just the way you were. God doesn't do encores in that sense. Because God isn't manipulated. God is speaking. He is unveiling himself to you in the way that you need to perceive. Because remember, the issue is you and I have to be developed in our perception. If we depend on the fact that there's this physical reality of fire, and we see fire and say, okay, that's God, then you're not perceiving God. Right? You're making a formula out of something. You see the difference, yes? So, our final question this morning: what does it mean to you that God is normatively known through silence and perception?
Normatively, like normally.
This is his normal way of working.
But you can't strive after him.
Yes. Yeah, you can't strive after him. You can open to him, but you can't strive after him.
Yeah, I can't manipulate how you think your relationship's going with him. You know, you can't make things happen. He will
Yes.
reveal, but you have to then be silent listening for that.
Yes, exactly right.
You can't make it up on your own.
Right.
It's comforting to know that.
Yeah, it is comforting. And coming back to one of your points, Rob, earlier, we've been so schooled in the idea that we know God by how we feel. If I'm feeling peaceful, well, that's God. Could be you're just not thinking deeply enough about what's going on, too. But if I feel good, then that's God. And so we reduce God to how do we feel. And then when we don't feel a certain way, we wonder, well, where is God? Why isn't he present to me? It is such a radical notion that God is actually known through silence. Not how powerful your emotion is. Not how much you're worked up about a message or a song. God is known in the context of a thin silence, where you're shutting down all of that striving, all of that manipulating, all of that working up, where you've really just stopped handling your life. Because, you see, you know the real life deadlines and God doesn't. And so you've got to handle the real life deadlines because God's not going to look after that for you.
I think the way that I experience a thin silence is by having a conversation with God and not having an expectation. Just telling him how I feel, and just that's about it.
Yeah.
You know, just talking with him, and that's when I experience a thin silence.
Yeah. Yeah, that releasing of expectations is really important.
Yeah, I don't ask him for anything. I don't tell him what I need. I just talk
Yeah.
in my mind.
Yeah. That's good, Jeff. That's good. We also try and know God through what's happening, don't we, in our lives. Things are going really bad. Well, that means God is saying this to me. How did you come to that? Well, because all this wouldn't be happening if God was for me. Really? If God was for Jesus, he never would have been crucified. It's nonsensical, isn't it?
I was just telling Jeff about interruptions.
I'm sorry, did you just interrupt me?
How rude of you.
Rude.
Rude. You know, we get interrupted. We're doing things, and a couple times we got interrupted like 3 times. And I thought, that's him speaking.
Mm-hmm.
I need to listen to the interruptions, not look at it as an interruption, look at it completely differently.
Mm-hmm.
And it redirected the scene. What's going on?
Yeah, right. A lot of times interruptions are where we try to handle things. Don't you see I'm doing this and you're interrupting this, so I need to manage you so I can go ahead with what I was doing. Instead of opening, not having the expectation, God, how do you want me to handle the interruption? That's altogether different. Yeah, Jeff?
There's another piece of that tying into what you were talking about. And she's being polite. It's my problem with interruptions because I'm handling life pretty well. Yeah. Not point down. The quote-unquote interruption presents itself, but there's always an interim point of silence. And it's the silence, the break from what's happening. And it doesn't have to be terribly long, but there's always consistently a silence, a quiet part.
Mm-hmm.
And the quiet part is when, interestingly enough, there's a hearing of a voice, his voice, or a speaking into that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the learning part of this is to embrace that silence and the quiet.
Yes.
Again, it's momentary, and yet if that's embraced, lo and behold, I'm hearing something.
Yeah, that's good, Jeff.
If I don't embrace the moment that I have there, it's off the rails.
Yeah.
And it just keeps going off the rails.
Right. That's good. Thank you.
The interruption's a good thing, because
What would you know of interruptions?
I'm interrupted every day. So it's good work to like that, be like, okay, like in those moments where like it's just so silly and it's just so off the wall and it's just like whatever.
Yes.
Like embrace that and look to it and see where he wants to speak, because first reaction is annoying.
Sure.
Annoyance, frustration,
Yep.
or you've got your plan, but it's like it's not like you really need to go by your plan. Things can, in everyone's life, things can be flexible, but I can make things flexible. It's,
Yes.
I want to do what I want to do, or I want to go about something the way that I want to go about. So the interruption, that's really good
Yeah, it is good, isn't
for me to work on this week at least.
it? Yes.
Will she get to 5 p.m.?
What's that?
Will she even make it to 5 p.m.?
Right. Exactly right. Exactly right. So let's just remember a couple of things. It is in thin silence that we know the world is sacramental, that we know creation is God enchanted, and that we begin to see and hear spiritually what is really there. It is in thin silence that we know the world is sacramental, that we know creation is God enchanted, and that we begin to see and hear spiritually what is really there. And again, we're going to flesh this out a bit more in the coming weeks. Any closing comments or questions?
I notice a thin silence when I walk my dog.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He does. She does too. When she walks you.
She does too.
Yeah. Now, you do notice it those
Yeah.
times, don't you?
Yeah. Yeah, because I see this. I see the woods and the park and everything. I can see how it's all Sacramento during that
Yes.
time.
Yep. Exactly right. Exactly. All right. In just a few moments, we're going to be celebrating the life that we share with Jesus. And this is going to be a place of thin silence. There's more going on than we recognize physically. There is a presence in this practice, yeah. I, however, will not be serving you so that I don't spread the infection across the world. But Don and Kara will be. So reflect on the thin silence that we have now, and then come and take from the bread and the cup.